King of the Nile, The Rise of Arrakkamani. Part 3, The Lord of Fire and Salt. The 7 major towns and cities of the River Nile had all fallen under the control of a single ruler. Not an unprecedented event, but an uncommon one. More uncommon still was for that ruler to have come from such a forgotten family. 12 years prior, when the first steps were taken, the only one who could have predicted such events was Arrakkamani himself. But expected or not, all had to face the reality that Arrakkamani, the desert king of Medewi, was now king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Pharaoh, as he was pleased to be known. His younger brother found this new arrangement quite beneficial to him as well. He was called Lakamazes and was a popular joining point between various circles of Medewi elites, despite his links to the subject of their deepest envies. He had seen little of war or its pragmatisms, and so remained not so different to the young man Arrakkamani had left in the palace a decade prior. He was done a great favour by his brother in the form of receiving military command over the forces that would hold the northern end of the Nile. Perhaps at the behest of his social climbing wife, he took the offer and began raising men near Alexandria. And not for nothing, as while Arrakkamani took his main body of troops to finish off the holdouts from the separatist forces of Ptolemaioi, the Ptolemaic Empire had been mustering a force to claim their lands. It approached from the east, marching through the lands that Arrakkamani would have to argue most strongly to say he controlled. Realistically, the eastern bank of the Nile was in possession of whoever had the nearest army, and right now that was Theocritos, the man who would rule an empire if he could but restore it. Now Lakamazes would be called upon to return his brother's favour. He was to take the small force he had gathered so far and pretend to mount a defence of the road to Alexandria. Seeing the small size and limited equipment of the blockade, Theocritos was eager to smash through it, casting aside his prior concerns as to the exact location of the Medewi army under Arrakkamani. He crossed the Nile in peace and marched into the night, hoping to get away from the choke point quickly, and was relieved that no ill had come during his moment of weakness. But his tired troops would find that their forced march through the darkness brought ill beyond bearing. The dark shapes of the trees seemed to advance towards them. It was no delirium. Arrakkamani and thousands of warriors were the true source of the shadows around them, and as they lit their torches and let out their war cries, the spirit of the Ptolemaioi men was banished. They all knew what Arrakkamani had done to the men who had come before them, and now the same fate, perhaps worse, fell on them like a hammer. Chaos ensued as the invaders clamoured to be furthest from the Medewi lines. Theocritos and his cadre of noblemen at the head of the column was swallowed up and spat out by the night hunters, deepening the chaos yet further. Not that his leadership would have been able to rescue the situation. The pike phalanxes that had been behind him were menaced and frustrated by the Medewi men's light-footed retreats, always breaking their promise to give battle, and slowly leading the jostling squares of armour away from safety and into their snares. The only troops not sinking into despair were the Thracian Falksmen, marched halfway across the world for this battle and desperate for a fight. They were not at all intimidated by the painted skin of their foes. They knew it was not armour. But born warriors from distant lands, while a new challenge, had the same weakness as any men. They were surrounded, with each small splinter group feeling like they were the only ones left and the battle was lost. And since they believed it, it was so. As the sun arose, it was counted that 3,000 Ptolemaic soldiers had been killed, for closer to 300 lost among the markedly inferior Medewi army. It was a triumph that cemented Arrakkamani's control over Egypt, and created a chance to crush any future challenges before they would take root. He marched east, destroying the regrouped survivors from his ambush just in time to prevent Ozilkes, who had marched north from Myos Hormos upon hearing of the invasion, from stepping in to take the win for himself. Arrakkamani took from his unwanted assistant all the best troops he had brought, so that he could take an elite force east to the Ptolemaioi stronghold of Jerusalem. His enemy knew he was coming, and although the king marched as quickly as he could, he did not arrive before the city walls were lined with men and the gates firmly barred. He would need to prepare carefully to deal with the scenario. He began by sending 2 messages back to Egypt, one requesting that Lachemeses march to reinforce him, and another stating that the complaining Ozilkes would be permitted to marry a member of Arrakkamani's royal family, and to campaign west to clear the Ptolemaioi from Libya. A potential thorn in the king's back would thus deal with a current thorn in his side. Ozilkes, being rather more brilliant as a commander than the king would like, wasted no time. In fact, the arrival of Lachemeses at Arrakkamani's siege camp brought with him the news that Ozilkes had conquered all the lands around Ammonium, and established a pro-Medewi dynasty there to match the one the king had created to their north. With this achieved, the only step required to completely secure Egypt from invasion was to storm Jerusalem, which proved easy on account of the defenders having run out of food while Lachemeses had approached. The city was promptly secured, giving the local people the pleasure of being the possession of yet another foreign empire, and the idea that this could be their chance to reverse the trend before their new overlords settled in. It seemed though that settling in was not the Medewi plan. Lachemeses was sent on to capture the coastal hub at Tyros north of Jerusalem. It fell without much resistance, and in doing so put the Mediterranean between Ptolemaioi's remaining territories and their chance for redemption. Adding the complications of naval action to any future invasion plans would slow them down, but not stop them, and Arrakkamani, although completely foreign to the details of transporting armies by sea, took sufficient advice from his gangs of hangers-on that he did not consider the water to be his shield. The ships captured at Tyros were put into service to ferry the king and his army out towards Cyprus and the harbour at Salamis, where the Ptolemaioi military was basing its strength. He had been spurred on by the thought of escaping the violent opposition of his new subjects in Judea, and the droughts that plagued the region every year. At sea though there was little more comfort, for his sailors were just as unruly and unwilling. The voyage was hard and his seasick warriors were critically undersupplied. A week's crossing took twice as long, and hundreds of lives were lost before Salamis came into view. They arrived to find the Ptolemaioi had already fled the settlement and moved their headquarters further north still to Anatolia. Arrakkamani was disappointed to learn that it was not out of fear of his arrival, but out of necessity, for the droughts of the mainland were quite bearable in comparison to the conditions on the island. For what it was worth, the eastern side of the island had submitted to him, and only a small force remained defiant in the west. Such grand achievements and strategic advantages would have delighted any leader, but when to breathe the boiling summer air is brittle agony, they would trade it all away for a cup of water. Hundreds more of his men died alongside the townspeople they now ruled. So bad was the shortage that Arrakkamani himself, defiantly refusing special treatment for the sake of his men, overdid his stoic act and fell into a deep state of unconsciousness that nearly cost him his life. Nursed at sword point by the island's Greek-educated physicians, he was revived after a tense few days. He found his army gone and rain falling from the sky. It was the end of the suffering, for that year at least. By day's end, he heard of his troops' intended return, having captured the rest of the island with no trouble. The gods had shown him the folly of his actions, and now returned him to his course as a wiser man. That was the king's view of it, a view he would eschew many times in the future as he drunk deeply through future scarcities. Having had his fill of the miserable island, Arrakkamani took his troops back to Judea, marching with the intention of relieving Ozilkes of his commanding presence in Jerusalem. There his rival had been meeting with dignitaries from Greece, and in fact had negotiated a separate peace with each of the Ptolemaic Empire's allies, fully legitimizing the Medewi conquests so far. He was quick to offer Arrakkamani all the tribute gained through such deals. It was not enough to make the Pharaoh king feel less passed over, but the slight would have to be remembered until later, because news was coming in of a Ptolemaic army once again marching the scorching roads of Cyprus. The Medewi troops had no interest in returning to the Forsaken Island, and even less interest in another moment trapped in a disease-ridden hold with a too-high waterline. But Arrakkamani would not let his name be tarnished by a single setback, even one as inconsequential as the port at Salamis. Cursing his troops and riding from camp, he bought passage to the island from Tyros, poorly disguised as a private citizen who just so happened to travel with a bodyguard of several dozen Nubians wrapped in tiger skins and so laden with jewelry that the lighthouses didn't need to light their beacons. He added to his companions bands of Arabian mercenaries who had been gladly waiting for just such a rich madman to pass through the town. He sailed them to Salamis, arriving on the very day the Ptolemaioi army stamped into view. Expecting no resistance, the liberating army was surprised to see the walls of shields and spears formed up to stop them. Laughingly, they advanced, knowing that such an impoverished town could only have possibly fielded formations a single rank deep. The surprise of cavalry, led by Arrakkamani himself, clattering through the streets to meet their attack was so great that many turned and fled without a fight. The infantry, many ranks deep as the Ptolemaics realized with a sinking feeling, challenged their heavier opponents to advance across lines of stakes and hastily prepared pits. They did so, knowing that to show any sign of hesitation would be to admit that they were not destined for a walkover victory. The Galatian mercenaries they had brought were not so blinded by pride, and refused to attack at all when they saw the easy spoils they had been promised were not what was on offer that day. Thus, the eastern districts of the town were secured, while the west was made safe by the rapid scattering of light troops by Arrakkamani and his mounted warriors. He wheeled around to the rear flank of the main attacking force, revealing to them by his mere presence that the wings of their army had been neutralized. Most turned and fled to escape the closing trap, having thus far made little progress through the fortified streets ahead of them. Only a tiny fraction would escape with their lives. The Medewi occupation of Cyprus had been solidified. Arrakkamani had amazed foe and friend alike with his sudden appearance and victory, and his Ptolemaic rivals had lost the last major army under their command. His army, ashamed now that they did not follow their leader to glory, arrived soon to put themselves at his service once again. Their toils at sea would now be the penance they completed for doubting their king. He took them north, to the much larger port of Sidé on the southern coast of Anatolia, the final stronghold of Ptolemaioi. What remained of the Ptolemaic military made themselves scarce, flippantly tasking the Sidé militia with somehow dealing with the invasion on their own. Even abandoned by their leaders, the people still fielded an impressive army of spearmen and archers, eager to avoid becoming slaves or worse to the foreign king. And so, with the balance of forces not seeming entirely certain, Arrakkamani encamped east of the port to begin scheming an assault. The scheming was cut extremely short, however, as the last light of the day revealed on the southern horizon an array of sails, decorated with the yellowed stripes of the Tyros shipyard. It could only be Ozulki's. Indeed, he had slaughtered a Jewish rebellion in short order and quickly sailed out to join the invasion of Sidé, knowing that no other chances for action would be available afterwards. Furious at the presumptuous move, Arrakkamani broke camp and marched on Sidé immediately. With Ozulki's help, he could have assaulted it from land and sea, and given his foe no hope of victory. But then it would not be entirely his victory. And so, in the darkness of night, his weary troops formed up to storm the town. The more clear-headed Hellenites on the defending side appeared here and there from the darkness, shooting arrows into the poorly armoured Medewi men. Their only recourse was to charge the attackers, but they quickly faded back behind impenetrable walls of shields that claimed the lives of any brazen enough to bash their way through. In some respects, the Medewi men had no method to defeat such a foe. But the Sidé troops were so happy with the fashion in which they had halted their enemy's advance that they began measures doomed to bring defeat upon themselves. They chased the retreating Medewi to the outskirts of the town, eager to continue smashing them apart. But now that the narrow streets were not covering their flanks, they were vulnerable. Medewi men could appear from all directions and bypass their shielded front. More militia arrived to aid the first ambitious companies, but they would all quickly face the same fate, surrounded one by one and then slowly torn apart by attacks that rained in from all sides. Arrakkamani rode into the centre of town through a gap in the lines, his men giving up a great cheer as they saw him waving his standard behind the enemy lines. The remaining militia saw that they had failed and surrendered, just as the ships bearing Ozulki's and his men got close enough to notice that something was going on in the town. they landed beneath Medewi banners, signalling in no unclear terms the futility of their wasted journey. In good spirits, and perhaps remembering the favour the Greeks of Salamis had done in saving his life, Arrakkamani allowed the locals to retain everything about their way of life, but for their allegiance to the Ptolemaioi nobles, and they most likely had forsaken that in the days prior anyway. The Medewi troops and their king could sail home, knowing that the dynasty with a claim to their lands was crushed, and so the empire they had gained over nearly 2 decades of campaigning was now theirs for good. There would be plenty of fine land to apportion to all those who had served the king well. And of course, the king himself was the pharaoh of all such lands, not just from source to sea, but now beyond as well. His empire was greater in strength and wealth than the one it had replaced, more unified and better supported by its people, now that the current generation of oppressed Judeans had been put to the sword anyway. Would it last forever, as he had so boldly claimed it would when he had first set foot out of Medewi? For his legacy, it would barely matter. He had already achieved the impossible, and proven all who thought his claims were mere pretension wrong, those that still lived anyway. Medewi had conquered an empire and claimed all of the great river and more as prizes, and to all who heard the tale, there was only one character who could claim such great glories as these: Pharaoh Arrakkamani, King of the Nile.